In the modern car industry, attention usually goes to the loudest company in the room, the company with the boldest CEO, the biggest promises, the wildest stock price, the most futuristic factory, the car maker that says it will reinvent transportation, energy, software, artificial intelligence, and maybe the entire future of civilization. But while the world was watching the loudest companies fight for headlines, another empire kept moving quietly in the background. No cult of personality, no rockets landing on drone ships, no dramatic product reveals with smoke, lasers, and cheering crowds. No promise to destroy the old auto industry overnight. Just cars, millions of them, built with an almost obsessive level of discipline, sold in nearly every corner of the planet, trusted by taxi drivers, families, governments, delivery fleets, mechanics, farmers, students, and people who did not care about hype at all. They only cared about one thing. When they turned the key, the machine had to work. That company was Toyota. For decades, Toyota did not seem like the most exciting car company in the world. It was not always the fastest. It was not always the most luxurious. It was not always the most beautiful. But somehow, year after year, crisis after crisis, Toyota survived. Oil shocks, trade wars, recessions, currency problems, quality scandals, earthquakes, supply chain disasters, electric vehicle hype, the rise of Tesla, the rise of China, the collapse of old assumptions. Again and again, the world changed, and Toyota was still there. By 2025, Toyota remained the world's top-selling automaker for the sixth year in a row, selling more vehicles globally than any other car company on Earth. But the strange part was not just that Toyota was still number one. The strange part was how it got there. Toyota did not build its empire by chasing every trend. It built its empire by questioning everything slowly, by removing waste, by improving small details, by teaching workers to stop the entire production line when something was wrong, by believing that a company could become powerful not through speed alone, but through patience. And that idea would change manufacturing forever. Because Toyota's real product was never just the Corolla, or the Camry, or the Land Cruiser, or the Prius. Toyota's real product was a system, a way of thinking, a machine for building machines, and once that system began to spread, it did not just change Toyota, it changed factories all over the world. It influenced manufacturing, logistics, management, software development, hospitals, startups, and almost every industry that needed to do one thing better than before: produce more, waste less, improve constantly. But Toyota's story is not just a story about efficiency, it is also a story about fear. Because behind Toyota's calm image is a company shaped by scarcity, a company born in a country with limited natural resources, a company that had to learn how to compete against giants, a company that could not afford to waste materials, time, money, or mistakes. And maybe that is why Toyota became so difficult to kill. It was not built like a company expecting the world to be easy. It was built like a company expecting the world to be hard. And in the 21st century, when the entire automotive industry began rushing toward electric vehicles, software, batteries, and artificial intelligence, Toyota once again refused to follow the crowd completely. Critics said it was too slow. They said Toyota had lost its vision. They said it had missed the future. But Toyota believed something different. It believed the future would not arrive the same way everywhere. Not in America, not in Europe, not in Japan, not in Africa, not in Southeast Asia, not in countries where charging infrastructure was weak, electricity was expensive, or customers still needed affordable cars that could drive for years with minimal problems. So while Tesla pushed the world toward fully electric cars, Toyota kept defending a more complicated strategy: hybrids, plug-in hybrids, battery electric vehicles, hydrogen, efficient gasoline engines, multiple paths instead of one. To some people, it looked like hesitation. To Toyota, it looked like survival. Because Toyota was never just trying to win the next news cycle, it was trying to survive the next 100 years. This is the story of how a family business that began with weaving machines became the most disciplined car empire on earth. The story of how Toyota conquered America without looking American. The story of how it turned quality into a weapon. The story of how it refused to become Tesla. And the story of why the most powerful company in the car industry may not be the one shouting about the future, but the one quietly preparing for every version of it. This is Toyota, the empire that refused to die. There's something unusual about Toyota's power. Most empires announce themselves loudly. Ford changed the world with the Model T and the moving assembly line. General Motors built a kingdom of brands, colors, sizes, and status. Volkswagen became an industrial symbol of post-war Europe. Mercedes-Benz represented engineering prestige. BMW sold performance and identity. Tesla sold the future. But Toyota sold something less glamorous: trust. That may sound simple. But in the car business, trust is one of the hardest products to manufacture. A car is not just a machine, it is a promise. A promise that the engine will start on a freezing morning. A promise that the brakes will work when a child runs into the street. A promise that the transmission will not fail when the warranty expires. A promise that a family can drive across the country and come back safely. A promise that someone who spent years saving money did not make a mistake. Toyota understood this better than almost anyone. The company did not become powerful by making people dream about impossible machines. It became powerful by making people believe the ordinary machine would not betray them. That was the foundation of the empire. Not speed, not luxury, not image, reliability, and reliability is boring right up until the moment you need it. For much of the 20th century, the global auto industry was dominated by Western giants. America had Detroit, Germany had engineering prestige, Britain had famous brands, Italy had emotion and design. Japan, in the eyes of many Western consumers, was not supposed to become the center of the car world. After World War II, Japan was rebuilding from devastation. Its factories had been damaged, its economy was fragile, its industrial reputation was still developing, its domestic market was small compared with America, and its automakers had to learn while competing against companies that had decades of experience, huge budgets, and massive production capacity. Toyota was not born into an easy position. It was not a giant from the beginning. It did not have unlimited capital. It did not have global prestige. It did not have the advantage of being located in the largest car market on earth. It had to build its advantage slowly, painfully, methodically, and because it could not afford to waste anything, it became obsessed with waste itself. Wasted time, wasted movement, wasted inventory, wasted material, wasted talent, wasted attention, wasted mistakes. This obsession would eventually become one of the most important business ideas of the modern era. But before Toyota became a case study in management books, before executives from around the world flew to Japan to study its factories, before words like Kaizen and Lean became part of business language, Toyota was simply a company trying not to die. That detail matters. Because companies that grow from abundance often behave differently from companies that grow from limitation. A company with unlimited resources can hide its problems for years. It can throw money at inefficiency. It can build extra inventory. It can hire more people than it needs. It can delay hard decisions. It can survive even when its systems are weak. But Toyota did not have that luxury. Toyota had to see problems early. It had to fix them at the source. It had to create a culture where mistakes were not buried under production targets, but exposed before they became disasters. In many companies, stopping production is treated like failure. At Toyota, stopping production became a kind of discipline. If something was wrong, the system had to know. If a defect appeared, it had to be investigated. If a worker noticed a problem, the problem could not simply continue down the line, quietly growing more expensive with every step. This idea sounds obvious now, but it was radical in practice, because it required a company to admit that speed without quality was not progress. It required managers to trust workers. It required workers to take responsibility for the system. And it required everyone to understand that the goal was not just to build more cars. The goal was to build better cars by building better processes. Over time, Toyota turned this thinking into a competitive weapon. While other companies focused on making production lines faster, Toyota focused on making them smarter. While others pushed volume, Toyota pushed learning. While others inspected quality at the end, Toyota tried to build quality into every step. This did not make Toyota look dramatic. It made Toyota look almost quiet, but that quietness was deceptive. Because underneath the surface, Toyota was building one of the most powerful industrial operating systems in history. And the results became impossible to ignore. A Toyota was not usually the car people bought to impress strangers. It was the car people recommended to their children. It was the car mechanics respected. It was the car taxi drivers trusted. It was the car people kept for 10, 15, sometimes 20 years. And that kind of reputation compounds. A flashy car can create attention quickly, but a reliable car creates stories slowly. A father tells his son, a neighbor tells a friend, a mechanic tells a customer buys another one. A family returns to the same brand. A fleet manager chooses the safe option. A used car buyer pays more because the badge still means something. That is how Toyota built its empire. Not through one moment, through millions of small confirmations. Every engine that started, every Corolla that survived, every Camry that became invisible because it simply did its job. Every Land Cruiser that crossed deserts, mountains, war zones, construction sites, and remote villages. Toyota became powerful because its cars became part of ordinary life, and ordinary life is the largest market in the world. But the deeper question is this: where did that mentality come from? Why did Toyota become so obsessed with quality, discipline, and continuous improvement? Why did it build a culture that treated problems not as embarrassments, but as signals? Why did it believe that machines should stop when something went wrong instead of blindly continuing? To understand that, we have to go back before Toyota was a car company, before the Corolla, before the Camry, before the Prius, before the Land Cruiser, before Toyota became the symbol of reliability. We have to go back to a man who was not trying to build cars at all. He was trying to build a better Loom. His name was Sakichi Toyoda. And the empire of Toyota began not on a highway, but with thread. Before Toyota became a car company, it was a company of machines, not engines, not transmissions, not wheels, looms, wood, metal, gears, thread, and motion. Long before the Toyota badge appeared on roads across the world, the family name behind it belonged to a man named Sakichi Toyoda. He was born in Japan in 1867 in a small village at a time when the country itself was transforming. Japan was moving out of isolation and into the modern industrial age. Railways were being built, factories were rising, Western machines were arriving, old systems were being challenged by new ones. And in the middle of that transformation, Sakichi Toyoda grew up watching one of the most common forms of labor in rural Japan: weaving. For many families, weaving was not an abstract industry. It was daily life. It was long hours, repetitive motion, physical exhaustion, small mistakes, broken threads, lost time. And Sakichi saw something that many people around him had simply accepted as normal. He saw waste, not just wasted material, wasted human effort, wasted attention, wasted potential. A person could sit at a loom for hours, repeating the same motion again and again, and still the process depended on constant human observation. If a thread broke, the worker had to notice it. If they missed it, the fabric could be ruined. The machine would keep moving, but the product would already be defective. To most people, that was just how work happened. To Sakichi Toyoda, it was a problem waiting to be solved. That small observation would eventually become one of the deepest ideas in Toyota's history. A machine should not blindly continue when something goes wrong. A machine should know when to stop. It sounds simple. But inside that idea was the beginning of a philosophy. Because the goal was not just to make a machine faster, the goal was to make a machine smarter. Sakichi began experimenting with looms, improving them step by step. He was not a wealthy industrialist at the beginning. He was not building from a position of comfort. He was an inventor working inside a country that was still trying to catch up with the industrial power of the West. And because resources were limited, every improvement mattered. A better mechanism could save time. A better design could reduce mistakes. A better machine could free people from repetitive labor. Sakichi's work eventually led to the development of automatic looms that could stop themselves when a thread broke. This was more than a technical feature. It was a new relationship between people and machines. In many factories, machines were treated like instruments of speed. The more they moved, the more productive the factory seemed. If there was a problem, workers or inspectors could deal with it later. But Sakichi's loom challenged that logic. If the machine continued after a defect appeared, it was not creating value, it was creating waste. The intelligent thing to do was not to keep moving. The intelligent thing to do was to stop. That idea would later become known as Jidoka. Automation with a human touch. A system where machines help detect problems and people are not trapped watching every second of production, like guards standing over a process that cannot be trusted. Instead, the process itself becomes more aware. A defect appears. The machine stops. The worker investigates. The cause is found. The process improves. And the mistake is not allowed to travel silently through the system. This was the seed of something much larger than textile production. Because the same principle that applied to broken thread could later apply to a defective car part, a loose bolt, a paint problem, a bad weld, a mistake in assembly, a process that looked fast but was quietly producing failure. Toyota's future was hidden inside that loom. The idea that quality should not be inspected only at the end. Quality should be built into the process from the beginning. Sakichi Toyoda became known as one of Japan's great inventors, and his automatic loom became a major achievement. But the most important thing he passed on was not only a machine, it was a way of thinking. Look closely, find waste, improve the process, respect the worker, do not ignore small problems, do not allow defects to continue, build intelligence into the system. This mentality would eventually move from textiles into automobiles. But that transition was not obvious. At the time, Japan did not seem destined to become an automotive superpower. The car industry was dominated by foreign companies. The United States had scale. Europe had technical heritage. Japan was still building its industrial base. And even within the Toyota family, cars were not the original business. The money came from looms. The expertise came from machines. The reputation came from invention. But Sakichi had a son. His name was Kiichiro Toyoda. And Kiichiro grew up inside a world where machines were not just objects. They were possibilities. He saw his father build, test, fail, improve, and test again. He saw that invention was not magic. It was persistence. He saw that progress was not one dramatic leap. It was thousands of small corrections. And when Kiichiro looked at the world, he saw another machine that would define the 20th century. The automobile. In America, cars were already changing society. Henry Ford had turned the Model T into a symbol of mass production. Roads, cities, suburbs, oil, steel, rubber, glass, advertising, finance. The automobile was not just a product. It was becoming the center of an entire economic system. Kiichiro understood that if Japan wanted to become a modern industrial nation, It could not depend forever on imported vehicles and foreign technology. Japan needed its own car industry, but that idea was dangerous. Building cars was not like building looms. A car was a much more complex machine. It required engines, frames, brakes, suspension, electrical systems, fuel systems, supply chains, dealers, service networks, and most importantly, trust. If a loom failed, production stopped. If a car failed, someone could die. The automobile business demanded a different level of responsibility, and yet Kiichiro was drawn to it. He studied the technology, he traveled, he observed foreign manufacturing, he watched how Western companies built cars at scale. But he did not simply want to copy them. That distinction would become important. Toyota would learn from the West, but it would not become a Western company. It would absorb ideas, study them, break them down, and rebuild them through a Japanese lens shaped by scarcity, discipline, and continuous improvement. This is one of the reasons Toyota later became so dangerous to its competitors. It was willing to learn from everyone, but it was not willing to blindly imitate anyone. The family business gave Kiichiro something more valuable than money. It gave him a foundation. The Toyota company already understood machines. It understood production. It understood the relationship between automation and human judgment. It understood that defects were not just mistakes, they were signals. It understood that improvement was not a department, it was a culture. So when the family moved from looms to automobiles, it did not start from nothing. It carried an invisible inheritance. The loom taught Toyota to stop when something was wrong. The car would teach Toyota how hard it was to survive when everything could go wrong. In the early years, Toyota's automotive dream looked fragile. It was not yet the global empire we know today. It was an experiment, a risk, a leap from thread to steel. And like many empires, it began before the world took it seriously. There were no global sales records, no legendary reliability reputation, no Corolla, no Camry, no Prius, no massive factories across continents. There was only a question. Could a company born from weaving machines build a car? And more importantly, could it build a car good enough to compete with the giants of the world? For Kiichiro Toyoda, the answer had to be yes. Because this was no longer just about one family business. It was about Japan's industrial future. And the next chapter of Toyota's story would not be written in thread. It would be written in steel, gasoline, and risk. When Kiichiro Toyoda looked at the automobile, he was not simply looking at a product. He was looking at the machine that was reshaping the modern world. In the early 20th century, the car was becoming more than transportation. It was becoming a force that changed everything around it: roads, cities, oil, steel, factories, labor, finance, suburbs, advertising, war, freedom, status. The automobile was not just an invention, it was an ecosystem, and the countries that controlled that ecosystem would control a major part of the industrial future. In America, that future was already moving at full speed. Henry Ford had shown what mass production could do. The Model T had turned the car from a luxury object into something millions of ordinary people could imagine owning. Detroit had become one of the centers of global manufacturing power. General Motors was building an empire of brands and consumer choice. The American car industry was not just making vehicles, it was making the 20th century. Japan was watching from a very different position. It did not have America's enormous domestic market. It did not have the same access to cheap raw materials. It did not have Detroit's massive industrial base. And it did not yet have the global confidence that comes from decades of automotive success. For Japan, building cars was not only a business opportunity, it was a national challenge. If the country depended forever on imported vehicles, imported technology, and foreign industrial knowledge, it would always remain vulnerable. Kiichiro Toyoda understood this. He had grown up inside a family shaped by invention. He had seen his father, Sakichi Toyoda, turn a simple observation about broken thread into a machine that could stop itself when something went wrong. He had seen how small improvements could build an entire company. But cars were different. A loom was complex. A car was a universe. An automobile was thousands of parts moving together under heat, pressure, vibration, and danger. It had to carry human beings at speed. It had to start reliably, stop safely, turn predictably, and survive abuse from people who did not understand how it worked. A car had to live in the real world: rain, mud, dust, snow, bad roads, bad fuel, bad maintenance, impatient drivers, long distances, heavy loads. And if the company failed, the consequences would not stay inside the factory. They would happen on the road. That made the decision to enter the car industry incredibly risky. The Toyota family business had money from its Loom technology, but it was not an automotive giant. It did not have a century of engine knowledge. It did not have a massive supplier network. It did not have thousands of trained automotive engineers waiting to be deployed. It had ambition, it had discipline, it had mechanical experience, and it had a belief that Japan needed to build its own industrial future. Kiichiro began studying automobiles seriously. He examined engines, he observed production methods, he paid attention to American manufacturing. He understood that Toyota could not enter the industry with romantic ideas alone. The company had to learn from the best. It had to understand what made Western automakers powerful. But from the beginning, Toyota's path was not simply imitation. This is one of the most important themes in the company's story. Toyota learned from America, but it did not become America. It studied mass production. But it did not copy mass production blindly. It looked at Ford's scale and efficiency, but it had to adapt everything to a very different reality. America could produce in huge volumes for a huge market. Toyota did not have that advantage. American factories could often afford larger inventories, larger batches, and more financial room for error. Toyota had to operate with less capital, less space, less demand, less experience, less tolerance for waste. And this limitation forced Toyota to think differently. In Detroit, abundance shaped production. In Toyota, scarcity shaped production. That difference would eventually become one of Toyota's greatest advantages. But in the beginning, it looked like weakness. The first Toyota cars were not symbols of global dominance. They were experiments. They were proof that the company could enter a field where it had no natural right to win. The early years were filled with trial, error, and uncertainty. Engines had to be developed, parts had to be sourced, workers had to be trained, production methods had to be built, customers had to be convinced. The company was moving from a business where it understood the machine deeply into a business where almost everything had to be learned, and then history became even harder. Japan's industrial growth was tied to the turbulence of the 1930s and the shadow of war. The automotive industry was not just commercial, vehicles were also strategic. Trucks, engines, and manufacturing capacity mattered to governments. Industrial policy, military demand, and national ambition shaped the environment around Toyota's early automotive development. Toyota was not being born in a peaceful, stable, consumer-driven market. It was being born inside an era of pressure. And pressure leaves marks. The company had to learn that survival depended on discipline. It had to conserve resources. It had to improve processes. It had to make machines work with the materials available. It had to solve problems quickly because the margin for failure was thin. The calm Toyota image that would later become familiar around the world was not born from comfort. It was born from stress. In 1937, Toyota Motor Company was formally established as a separate business. That moment could be described as the birth of Toyota as the world knows it today. But at the time, it was not the birth of an empire. It was the beginning of a struggle. Toyota was still small compared with the giants it would one day challenge. Ford and General Motors were already industrial legends. Their factories, distribution systems, and brand power existed on a scale Toyota could not match. If Toyota tried to beat them by becoming a smaller version of Detroit, it would likely fail, so Toyota had to become something else, something more careful, more adaptive, more disciplined, more sensitive to waste. This would not happen overnight. The Toyota production system, the Toyota way, and the global reputation for reliability were still in the future. The company had not yet become the symbol of lean manufacturing. It had not yet conquered America. It had not yet turned the Corolla into one of the most successful nameplates in automotive history. At this stage, Toyota was simply trying to prove that it belonged. And then World War II changed everything. Japan's defeat in 1945 left the country devastated. Cities had been destroyed, industry had been damaged, the economy was broken, materials were scarce. Demand was uncertain, the entire nation had to rebuild. For Toyota, this was a defining moment. A company built in scarcity now had to survive in even deeper scarcity. It could not rely on easy growth. It could not rely on endless capital. It could not rely on a massive domestic market suddenly buying millions of cars. It had to rebuild carefully. The post-war years forced Toyota to confront a brutal question. How do you build a car company when you cannot afford to waste anything? That question would become the foundation of Toyota's greatest breakthrough. Because in Detroit, mass production was built around scale, but in post-war Japan, Toyota needed a system built around flexibility. It could not produce huge batches of identical cars and hope demand would appear. It could not keep massive inventories of parts. It could not hide inefficiency inside volume. It had to produce what was needed when it was needed with as little waste as possible. This was not just a manufacturing preference, it was survival logic. And survival logic can create powerful ideas. Inside Toyota, people began developing a different kind of production system, one that would eventually be associated with names like Taiichi Ohno, one that would combine the old Toyota principle of stopping when something went wrong with a new obsession, producing only what was needed exactly when it was needed, jidoka, just in time, continuous improvement, respect for people, waste reduction. These were not slogans at the beginning, they were answers to pressure. Toyota's genius was that it turned pressure into process. It took the weakness of limited resources and transformed it into a strength. It built a system that could expose problems instead of hiding them. It learned to see inventory not as safety, but as a sign that something might be wrong. It learned to treat workers not as replaceable hands, but as people who could improve the system itself, and slowly Toyota began to develop a new identity. Not the biggest, not the richest, not the loudest, but disciplined. A company that understood that every defect had a cause, every delay had a reason, every wasteful motion had a cost, every small improvement could compound. That mindset would eventually carry Toyota far beyond Japan. But before it could conquer the world, it had to survive at home. It had to rebuild after war. It had to fight through financial crisis. It had to learn how to make vehicles that people could trust. And it had to do all of this while the American giants still looked almost untouchable. From the outside, Toyota's future did not look obvious. It looked fragile. A company born from looms had entered the most competitive industrial battlefield of the 20th century. It had no guarantee of victory, no guarantee of survival, no guarantee that anyone outside Japan would ever care about its cars. But Toyota had something that many of its competitors underestimated. It had a culture shaped by machines that stopped when something went wrong, a culture shaped by scarcity, a culture shaped by the belief that small improvements, repeated long enough, could become a weapon. And in the ruins of post-war Japan, that weapon was about to be sharpened. The next chapter of Toyota's story would not be about inventing the car. It would be about inventing a better way to build it. After the war, Toyota was not trying to impress the world. It was trying to survive. Japan was rebuilding from devastation. Materials were limited. Capital was scarce. Demand was uncertain. The country needed transportation, but the economy could not support the kind of mass production that had made Detroit powerful. In America, Ford and General Motors could build enormous factories, produce huge volumes, and rely on a massive domestic market to absorb the output. Toyota did not have that world. Toyota had smaller demand, less money, less space, less inventory, less room for mistakes. And yet, those limitations forced Toyota to ask a question that would eventually change manufacturing forever. What if a company did not need to be the biggest to become the best? What if the weakness was actually the beginning of a new system? This was the environment that shaped the Toyota production system. It did not emerge from a perfect theory written in an office. It came from pressure, from factory floors, from shortages, from the need to build cars without wasting materials the company could not afford to lose, from the need to improve every day because there was no other option. One of the central figures in this transformation was Taiichi Ohno. Ohno was not building a glamorous vision of the future. He was looking at the factory floor with brutal honesty. He saw workers waiting. He saw parts sitting. He saw machines producing more than the next process needed. He saw motion that did not add value. He saw defects traveling through the system. He saw inventory hiding problems. And he understood something that many large companies ignored. Waste is not always obvious. Sometimes waste looks like productivity. A machine running at full speed can look productive. But if it is producing parts that are not needed, it is creating waste. A warehouse full of inventory can look like security. But if that inventory hides bad planning, quality problems, or slow response, it is creating waste. A worker moving constantly can look busy. But if the movement does not create value, it is still waste. Toyota began to develop a system that treated waste as the enemy, not because waste was philosophically unpleasant, but because waste could kill the company. This obsession became known through the Japanese word muda. Muda meant waste, and Toyota trained itself to see muda everywhere: overproduction, waiting, unnecessary transportation, overprocessing, excess inventory, unnecessary motion, defects, unused human talent. Each form of waste weakened the system. Each one consumed time, money, space, attention, and energy, and Toyota could not afford to let them hide. But Toyota's answer was not simply to make people work harder. That is one of the most misunderstood parts of the Toyota way. The point was not to squeeze workers until they broke. The point was to improve the system so human effort was not wasted. A bad process makes good people look inefficient. A good process helps ordinary people create extraordinary consistency. Toyota understood that if a worker had to search for tools, the system was wasting time. If a worker had to walk too far, the system was wasting motion. If a worker had to fix the same problem repeatedly, the system had failed to solve the root cause. If a defect kept appearing, the real question was not who made the mistake. The real question was, why did the system allow the mistake to happen? This was a different way to think about management. In many companies, problems flow upward as blame. At Toyota, problems were supposed to flow downward into process improvement. A problem was not just a failure, it was information. And information was valuable. This is where the old Toyota principle returned. Jidoka. The idea that a machine should stop when something goes wrong. In Toyota's factories, this became a powerful symbol. If a worker noticed a problem, they could stop the line. At first glance, that sounds inefficient. Stopping production sounds expensive. It sounds like the opposite of mass manufacturing. But Toyota saw it differently. A defect that is ignored does not disappear. It travels. It becomes more expensive. It moves from one process to the next. It gets buried inside a larger assembly. It reaches the customer. It becomes a repair, a complaint, a recall, a damaged reputation. Toyota believed it was better to stop early than apologize later. That belief required courage, because stopping the line exposed problems immediately. It made weaknesses visible. It prevented managers from pretending everything was fine, and that was the point. A hidden problem is comfortable. A visible problem can be fixed. The other pillar was just in time. The idea was simple, but extremely difficult to execute. Produce only what is needed, when it is needed, in the amount needed, not more, not earlier, not in massive piles that sit waiting for demand. Just in time was partly inspired by the way American supermarkets worked. A customer takes an item from the shelf is replenished. The store responds to actual demand instead of blindly pushing goods forward. Toyota applied a similar logic to production. Each process would receive what it needed from the previous process at the right time. Parts would not simply flood the factory. They would move with purpose. This made inventory smaller, but it also made problems impossible to hide. That was dangerous and powerful. Large inventories can act like water covering rocks in a river. The boat moves smoothly because the water level is high, but underneath, the rocks are still there. Bad suppliers, unreliable machines, slow changeovers, quality defects, poor communication, weak planning, excess inventory hides all of it. Toyota lowered the water, and when the rocks appeared, it removed them one by one. That was the genius, not one giant miracle. 1,000 small corrections. This became Kaizen, continuous improvement. Kaizen was not about dramatic transformation. It was about the belief that everything could be improved. A tool could be placed closer, a step could be removed, a part could be easier to reach, a mistake could be made harder to repeat, a machine could be adjusted, a question could be asked, a process could be simplified. The change might look tiny, but tiny improvements repeated for decades become almost impossible to compete with. This is one of Toyota's deepest lessons. The world loves breakthroughs. Toyota loved accumulation. A breakthrough creates a headline. Accumulation creates an empire. And while competitors looked at Toyota's cars, the real secret was in the system that produced them. Executives from other companies could buy a Toyota, take it apart, study the engine, inspect the materials, analyze the design, and still miss the point. The car was only the visible result. The invisible system mattered more. The meetings, the habits, the factory layout, the supplier relationships, the problem-solving culture, the respect for workers, the discipline of asking why again and again. Why did this happen? Why did the part fail? Why was the tool missing? Why was the machine waiting? Why did the worker have to walk? Why did the supplier deliver late? Why did the customer experience a defect? Toyota became famous for asking why until the answer reached the root, not the symptom. The root. This became part of the company's problem-solving culture. Because if you only fix symptoms, the same problems return wearing different clothes. Toyota wanted to fix causes, and over time, this made the company extremely hard to beat, not because Toyota never made mistakes. It made mistakes, sometimes serious ones. But the deeper strength of Toyota was its ability to learn from problems and turn them into process. The Toyota way was not only about efficiency, it was about humility. The humility to admit that the current process is not perfect. The humility to listen to workers closest to the problem. The humility to stop the line. The humility to say that no matter how good the company becomes, it can still improve. This is why Toyota's culture was so different from the heroic style of business leadership. Some companies are built around the genius of one person. Toyota was built around the discipline of many people. Its power did not depend on one dramatic founder standing on a stage. It depended on thousands of workers noticing small problems and making small improvements, day after day, shift after shift, year after year. That is less cinematic than a revolution. But it is far more durable, and durability became Toyota's identity. The Toyota production system did not just help the company build cars, it helped Toyota build trust, because quality was not added at the end. It was protected at every step. The engine was not reliable by accident. The assembly was not consistent by accident. The reputation was not created by advertising alone. It was manufactured through discipline. By the time the rest of the world began to understand what Toyota had built, the company had already created one of the most influential operating systems in industrial history. Other companies tried to copy it. They used the words lean, kaizen, just-in-time, continuous improvement. They hired consultants. They redesigned factories. They put posters on walls. But many failed to capture the deeper truth. Toyota's system was not just a set of tools, it was a culture, and culture is much harder to copy than machinery. You can copy a production line, you can copy a process chart, you can copy a supplier schedule, you can copy the language. But you cannot easily copy decades of habits. You cannot instantly create trust between workers and managers. You cannot fake humility. You cannot pretend to respect problems if your real instinct is to hide them. That was Toyota's advantage. The system looked simple from a distance, but inside it required discipline that many companies could not sustain. And this system would soon become Toyota's weapon in the global market. Because while Detroit was still confident in its size, Toyota was quietly becoming more precise. While American automakers built power, chrome, and status, Toyota was building reliability. While competitors relied on scale, Toyota refined process. And when the world changed, when oil became expensive, when customers began caring more about efficiency, durability, and value, Toyota would be ready. The company that once seemed too small to challenge Detroit had built something Detroit did not fully understand. A different way to build cars, a different way to see problems, a different way to survive. And soon that way would cross the Pacific. Toyota was no longer just learning from America. It was preparing to compete with it. For Toyota, America was not just another market, it was the battlefield. If a car company wanted to prove itself in the 20th century, it eventually had to face the United States. America was the land of highways, suburbs, drive-ins, gas stations, road trips, pickup trucks, muscle cars, and enormous automotive confidence. Cars were not simply machines in America. They were identity. They were freedom. They were status. They were part of the national mythology. Detroit did not just build cars. Detroit built the American dream on wheels. General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler dominated the roads with size, power, chrome, and cultural authority. Their cars were long, wide, loud, emotional, and unmistakably American. Against that world, Toyota looked almost invisible, small, foreign, practical, unfamiliar. In the beginning, Toyota did not enter America like an empire. It entered like an outsider, and outsiders are rarely trusted immediately. To many American consumers in the early years, Japanese cars did not carry prestige. They were not symbols of success. They were not what people dreamed about when they imagined the open road. They were easy to dismiss. Too small, too weak, too strange, too foreign. America had its own car culture, and Toyota did not fit into it. At first that seemed like a problem, but over time it became an opening, because Toyota was not trying to out-American American cars. It was trying to offer something different. While Detroit sold power, Toyota sold efficiency. While Detroit sold size, Toyota sold practicality. While Detroit sold style, Toyota sold reliability. And at first that was not enough to shake the giants. But history has a way of changing what customers value. For decades, cheap gasoline helped shape American automotive taste. If fuel was inexpensive, size felt natural. A large car could be comfortable, powerful, and emotionally satisfying. The cost of inefficiency was easy to ignore when the pump did not punish you for it. But then the world changed. Oil became political. Gasoline became expensive. Lines formed at gas stations. Americans who had once assumed fuel would always be cheap suddenly had to think differently. A big car that once felt like freedom could start to feel like a burden. A small, efficient car that once seemed unimpressive could start to look smart. This was Toyota's moment. The company did not need to convince every American to love Japanese cars overnight. It only needed reality to make its strengths harder to ignore. And reality did exactly that. Cars like the Corolla arrived with a different promise. They were not dramatic. They did not roar like muscle cars. They did not dominate the road with size. They did not look like rolling palaces. But they worked. They used less fuel. They were affordable. They were easier to maintain. And they built a reputation that advertising money alone could not buy. They lasted. This became Toyota's quiet advantage. A customer might buy one Toyota because gasoline was expensive. But they bought the next Toyota because the first one did not betray them. That is how trust compounds. Not through one commercial, not through one headline, but through years of ordinary performance. The car starts. The repair bill is manageable. The engine survives. The neighbor notices. The mechanic recommends it. The resale value stays strong. The family buys another one. Toyota understood something profound about the American market. Americans loved dreams. But they also loved things that worked. And once Toyota proved that its cars worked, the brand began moving from the margins toward the center of American life. The Corolla became one of the clearest symbols of this rise. It was not designed to be a fantasy machine. It was designed to be a rational choice that kept proving itself after purchase. For millions of drivers, the Corolla became the car that did not ask for attention. It simply did its job. In a culture obsessed with performance and image, that might sound boring. But boring can become beautiful when the alternative is expensive failure. Then came the Camry. If the Corolla helped Toyota earn trust, the Camry helped Toyota enter the American mainstream. The Camry was not just small and efficient. It was comfortable, practical, family-friendly, reliable. It became the kind of car that fit into suburbs, school parking lots, office garages, rental fleets, and long commutes. It did not need to shout. Its power came from being easy to recommend. That is one of the most underrated forces in business. Recommendation. A product that people recommend becomes cheaper to sell over time. Advertising can create awareness. But trust creates repetition, and repetition creates dominance. By the 1980s and 1990s, Toyota was no longer just a foreign brand trying to find a place in America. It was becoming a benchmark. American consumers began comparing reliability against Toyota. Mechanics began speaking about Toyota differently. Used car buyers began valuing Toyota differently. Fleet buyers began calculating Toyota differently. And Detroit had to pay attention. At first, some American executives misunderstood the threat. They saw Japanese cars as small car competition. They did not fully understand that Toyota's real advantage was not just size or fuel economy, it was the system behind the cars. Toyota was not winning only because it built compact vehicles. It was winning because it had learned how to build consistent quality at scale. It was winning because problems were attacked at the process level. It was winning because factory discipline became customer trust. And when customers trust a brand, they forgive less from competitors. A person who drives a Toyota for 10 years, with few problems, starts to ask a dangerous question when another brand fails. Why can't they build it like this? That question is deadly because it changes expectations. Toyota did not just sell cars in America, it raised the standard. Detroit had to respond, but responding was harder than it looked. A competitor can redesign a car. It can offer discounts. It can launch a marketing campaign. It can add features. It can improve styling. But changing a manufacturing culture is much harder. Toyota's advantage was deep. It was not only in the showroom, it was in supplier relationships, factory routines, quality control, worker training, production philosophy, long-term thinking. And because those things take years to build, Toyota's lead was not easy to copy. Still, Toyota faced a new challenge. If it wanted to become truly accepted in America, it could not remain only an importer. It had to build in America. This was both a strategic move and a symbolic one. Building vehicles in the United States helped Toyota reduce political pressure, respond more closely to local demand, and prove that its system could work outside Japan. But it also tested one of the most important questions in Toyota's history. Was the Toyota production system Japanese, or was it universal? Could Toyota take the habits, discipline, and culture developed in Japan and make them work with American workers, American suppliers, and American conditions? The answer would shape the future of the company. Toyota's American manufacturing operations showed that the system was not simply about nationality, it was about principles. Respect people, expose problems, reduce waste, improve continuously, build quality into the process. These ideas could travel. They were not easy to transplant, but they could travel. And that made Toyota even more dangerous. Because now, Toyota was not just exporting cars, it was exporting a way of building cars. The company that had once studied American mass production was now teaching America a different kind of production. That reversal was historic. Decades earlier, Japan had looked to Detroit as the model. Now Detroit was studying Toyota. Executives, engineers, consultants, and academics wanted to understand how a company from post-war Japan had built such a powerful industrial machine. The answer was uncomfortable. Toyota had not beaten America by becoming louder. It had beaten expectations by becoming more disciplined. It had not needed to be glamorous. It had needed to be consistent. And consistency over time became a form of power. By the time Toyota became one of the dominant brands in the United States, its image had transformed completely. The same qualities that once made it easy to dismiss became the qualities that made it trusted. Small became efficient. Simple became dependable. Practical became intelligent. Quiet became confident. And Toyota became part of American life. Not as an outsider anymore, but as the car in the driveway, the car in the school pickup line, the car in the office parking lot, the car driven by someone who did not want drama, the car passed down to a teenager, the car bought used because everyone knew it still had life left in it. This was not conquest in the traditional sense. Toyota did not conquer America with one spectacular model. It conquered America through repetition, through millions of uneventful mornings, through engines that started, through commutes completed, through road trips survived, through repair bills avoided, through families who returned to the brand because the last car had earned the next sale. That is the kind of conquest that does not look dramatic while it is happening, but decades later, it becomes impossible to deny. Toyota had entered the most powerful car market in the world as an outsider, and slowly, patiently, it became one of the companies that defined it. But Toyota's next major move would be different, because after proving that it could beat Detroit on reliability, efficiency, and discipline, Toyota would make a bet on a technology many people did not yet understand. A car that looked strange, a car that sounded like a compromise, a car that mixed gasoline and electricity before the world was ready to fully embrace electric vehicles. It would not be a supercar. It would not be beautiful. It would not be loud. But it would become one of the most important vehicles Toyota ever built. The Prius. And with it, Toyota would show the world that sometimes the future does not arrive as a revolution. Sometimes it arrives quietly, at 50 miles per gallon. By the time Toyota had conquered the American mainstream, it had already proven something important. It could build cars people trusted. It could compete with Detroit. It could take ideas from the West, refine them through its own system, and send them back across the Pacific as something stronger. But Toyota's next challenge was different. It was not just about building a better car. It was about imagining what the car would become. By the 1990s, the automotive industry was facing questions that could no longer be ignored. Fuel economy mattered. Emissions mattered. Oil dependence mattered. Urban pollution mattered. Governments were paying attention. Environmental concerns were growing. And even if the world was not yet ready to abandon gasoline, the old assumption was beginning to crack. The internal combustion engine had powered the 20th century. But would it also power the 21st? Toyota began asking that question before many of its competitors took it seriously. And once again, Toyota's answer was not loud. It was not dramatic. It was not a sports car. It was not a luxury machine. It was not designed to make the driver feel like a hero. It was a strange, compact, aerodynamic car with a name most people had never heard before. Prius. When Toyota launched the Prius in Japan in 1997, it was not obvious that the car would become an icon. In fact, at first glance, it looked almost like the opposite of an icon. It was awkward, it was quiet, it was practical, it did not roar, it did not look fast, it did not seem emotional in the traditional automotive sense. But hidden under that unusual shape was one of the most important strategic bets in Toyota's history. The Prius was a hybrid. It combined a gasoline engine with an electric motor. That sounds ordinary now, but at the time it was a radical idea for a mass-produced car. The goal was not to eliminate gasoline completely. The goal was to use gasoline more intelligently, in traffic, at low speeds, and during moments when a conventional engine wasted energy. The electric system could help. Energy that would normally be lost during braking could be captured. The gasoline engine and electric motor could work together, each doing what it did best. It was not a revolution that burned the old world down. It was a bridge. And Toyota understood bridges. The company had never been built around sudden destruction. It had been built around improvement, step by step, problem by problem, waste by waste. The Prius was Toyota thinking applied to the future of transportation. Instead of asking, how do we replace the car overnight, Toyota asked, how do we make the car better right now? That difference mattered. Because Toyota was not designing for a fantasy world where every customer had charging infrastructure, every country had clean electricity, and every driver was ready to change habits immediately. Toyota was designing for reality, and reality is messy. People still needed range. They still needed affordability. They still needed reliability. They still needed to refuel quickly. They still needed a car that could work in ordinary life without asking the entire world around it to change first. That was the power of the hybrid. It did not require the customer to become an early adopter. It did not require a charger in the garage. It did not require new infrastructure. It did not require a new driving lifestyle. You simply bought the car, filled it with gasoline, and used less of it. That simplicity became powerful. The Prius arrived before the electric vehicle became fashionable, before Tesla became a household name, before battery factories became national strategy, before every automaker had an EV plan, before governments began setting aggressive deadlines for combustion engines. Toyota had already placed a bet, and for years that bet made Toyota look visionary. The Prius became more than a car, it became a signal. In Hollywood, it became a symbol of environmental awareness. In cities, it became a practical answer to rising fuel costs. For technology-minded consumers, it became proof that the old car could be re-engineered. For Toyota, it became a demonstration that the company could innovate without abandoning its core identity. Because the Prius still had to be a Toyota. That meant it could not be experimental in the fragile sense. It had to work. The hybrid system had to survive real customers, real commutes, real heat, real cold, real maintenance habits, Real traffic, real neglect. That was not easy. A hybrid added complexity. Two power sources, battery management, electric motors, software, regenerative braking, a gasoline engine designed to cooperate with an electric system. This could have become a reliability nightmare. But Toyota approached it with the same mindset that shaped everything else. Make the process stable. Control quality. Test obsessively. Improve continuously. Do not let the customer become the test subject for unfinished ambition. This was a major difference between Toyota's culture and the culture of many technology companies. In Silicon Valley, failure can be treated as part of the adventure. Launch fast, break things, update later. In the car business, that philosophy has limits. A failed app annoys a user. A failed car can put someone on the side of the highway. Toyota did not want innovation that only looked good in a presentation. It wanted innovation that could survive a taxi driver, a parent, a commuter, and a mechanic. The Prius proved that this was possible. Over time, it became one of the most recognizable hybrid vehicles in the world, and the deeper effect was even bigger than the sales of one model. The Prius changed Toyota's image. Toyota was no longer just the company of reliability, it was also the company of practical, environmental technology. Not the most emotional brand, not the most rebellious, but serious, credible, early, and in business, being early only matters if you are also durable. Many companies experiment. Few turn experiments into mass market trust. Toyota did. The success of the Prius also reinforced a belief inside the company. The future does not have to arrive through one path. It can arrive through stages. A better gasoline engine, a hybrid, a plug-in hybrid, a battery electric vehicle, maybe hydrogen in some use cases, maybe different solutions for different markets. To Toyota, this was not confusion, it was realism. A driver in California might be ready for a fully electric car. A driver in rural America might not be. A customer in Norway might have charging access. A customer in Southeast Asia might not. A wealthy buyer might afford a new electric vehicle. A working family might need an efficient used hybrid. Toyota looked at the world and saw not one market but many worlds. And the Prius fit that worldview perfectly. It reduced fuel consumption without demanding a revolution. It lowered emissions without waiting for perfect infrastructure. It made electrification familiar before full electrification became practical for everyone. But success can create its own trap. Because once the Prius made Toyota look ahead of the curve, the world began to move faster. Battery technology improved. Tesla emerged. Governments pushed harder. Investors started rewarding electric vehicle companies with enormous valuations. The word hybrid began to sound less like the future and more like a compromise. Suddenly, Toyota's greatest strength started to look, to some people, like hesitation. Critics began asking why Toyota was not moving faster into fully electric cars. Why was the company still defending hybrids? Why was it still talking about multiple pathways? Why was the world's largest automaker not trying to become Tesla? This criticism would grow louder in the 2000s and 2000s. But Toyota's position was not random. It came from the same logic that had shaped the company for generations. Do not waste. Do not assume. Do not build for headlines. Build for customers. Build for the real world. Toyota believed that hybrids still solved real problems for millions of people. And Toyota was right about one thing that many EV optimists underestimated. The world does not change evenly. Technology adoption is not a straight line. Infrastructure takes time. Battery supply chains are complicated. Electric grids vary. Customer incomes vary. Government policies change. Raw material prices change. And the cleanest solution on paper is not always the easiest solution at scale. This is where Toyota's patience became controversial. To some people, Toyota looked cautious. To others, it looked stubborn. But Toyota saw caution as responsibility. A car company that sells millions of vehicles cannot think only about early adopters. It has to think about ordinary customers, the people who cannot afford to gamble, the people who need transportation before the perfect future arrives, the people who live far from chargers, the people who buy used cars, the people who keep vehicles for 15 years, the people who do not want to be part of a technological experiment. Toyota built its empire by serving those people. And the Prius was one of the clearest examples of that philosophy. It was not a car that tried to make gasoline disappear overnight. It was a car that made gasoline less wasteful. And for Toyota, that was not a small thing, it was a very Toyota thing. Because Toyota's deepest instinct was never to chase purity, it was to reduce waste in the world as it actually existed. The Prius did exactly that. It took the old engine and made it work with a new system. It took energy that used to disappear and captured it. It took a normal commute and made it more efficient. It took environmental concern and turned it into something ordinary people could buy. That was Toyota's genius. Not making the future feel like science fiction, making the future feel practical. But the same bet that made Toyota look brilliant would eventually place it in the center of one of the biggest arguments in automotive history. Was Toyota patiently managing the transition? Or was it falling behind? Was the hybrid strategy wisdom? Or fear? Was the world's greatest car company preparing for the future? Or protecting the past? Those questions became unavoidable when a new company from California began turning electric vehicles into objects of desire. Tesla did not want to build a bridge. Tesla wanted to burn the bridge and force the world to cross. And suddenly, Toyota, the master of patience, was facing an opponent built on speed, risk, and spectacle. The Prius had shown that Toyota could see the future early, but Tesla would challenge whether Toyota could move fast enough once the future arrived. And that conflict would define the next chapter of Toyota's story. For decades, Toyota had been the company that saw the future early. It had pioneered mass-market hybrid technology. It had made the Prius a global symbol. It had built one of the most respected manufacturing systems in history. It had conquered America. It had become one of the largest automakers on Earth. And yet, by the 2000s, Toyota found itself facing a strange accusation that it was behind. Not because its cars had suddenly stopped selling, not because its factories had stopped working, not because customers had lost trust, but because the definition of the future had changed, and that future now had a name: Tesla. Tesla did not think like Toyota. It did not act like Toyota. It did not speak like Toyota. Where Toyota was cautious, Tesla was aggressive. Where Toyota moved step by step, Tesla made enormous promises. Where Toyota believed in multiple technologies, Tesla believed the future was electric, fully electric, no gasoline engine, no hybrid bridge, no compromise. For Toyota, the transition to a new technology had always been something to manage carefully. For Tesla, it was something to accelerate. The contrast could not have been sharper. Toyota was built by generations of engineers, factory workers, managers, suppliers, and habits. Tesla was built around disruption. Toyota respected the existing system and tried to improve it. Tesla wanted to replace the system. Toyota looked at the car industry and saw complexity. Tesla looked at the same industry and saw delay. One company asked, "What solution works for the greatest number of people today?" The other asked, "Why are we still waiting?" And for a while, Tesla's answer seemed to capture the imagination of the world. Electric cars stopped looking slow. They stopped looking strange. They stopped looking like sacrifices. Tesla made them fast, desirable, minimalist, technological. A Tesla did not feel like an environmental compromise. It felt like a product from the future. This changed everything. Suddenly, the Prius no longer looked revolutionary. It looked transitional. The hybrid, once the symbol of automotive progress, began to look like a halfway solution. A bridge to a future that Tesla claimed had already arrived. Investors noticed, governments noticed, competitors noticed, consumers noticed. Automakers began announcing electric vehicle targets, battery factories became strategic investments. Charging networks expanded, entire countries started debating when gasoline cars should disappear. Volkswagen invested billions. General Motors made aggressive electric commitments. Chinese automakers scaled rapidly. Startups appeared everywhere. And Toyota? Toyota kept talking about hybrids. It kept talking about plug-in hybrids. It kept talking about hydrogen. It kept talking about different technologies for different markets. And critics became impatient. How could the company that launched the Prius be so slow to embrace fully electric cars? Had Toyota become too successful? Too conservative? Too comfortable? Had the company that once changed the industry become afraid of changing itself? These were fair questions. And for Toyota, they were dangerous questions. Because history is full of powerful companies that confused past success with permanent safety. Kodak understood photography and still missed the digital future. Nokia dominated mobile phones and still collapsed. BlackBerry looked untouchable until it was not. The larger the company, the harder it can be to admit that the world is changing. Toyota knew this. But Toyota also believed the electric vehicle debate had become too simple. To many people, the argument sounded obvious. Electric cars are cleaner. Therefore, every car should become electric as quickly as possible. Toyota looked deeper. Where would the batteries come from? How much lithium, nickel, graphite, and other material would be needed? How clean was the electricity charging the vehicles? Could the grid support rapid adoption? What about customers without garages? What about apartment buildings? What about rural areas? What about developing economies? What about cold climates, long-distance drivers, commercial fleets, people who could not afford an expensive new car? Toyota did not believe these questions meant electric cars were bad. It believed they meant the world was complicated. And Toyota had spent its entire history learning not to ignore complexity. The company's answer was what it called a multi-pathway strategy: battery electric vehicles, hybrids, plug-in hybrids, hydrogen fuel cells, more efficient combustion engines, different technologies for different customers, regions, and conditions. To critics, this looked unfocused. To Toyota, it looked realistic. Because the world is not one market. California is not Kenya. Norway is not India. Tokyo is not rural Texas. A wealthy homeowner with solar panels and a garage has different needs from a taxi driver in Bangkok. A commuter driving 20 miles per day has different needs from someone traveling hundreds of miles through remote areas. Toyota believed the industry was making a mistake by treating all of those people as if they lived the same life. This was not a glamorous position. It was much easier to say one thing: electric is the future, everything else is the past. That message fits in a headline. Toyota's argument did not. Toyota was saying the future may be electric, but the path to that future will not be identical everywhere. And while the world argued, Toyota kept selling enormous numbers of hybrids. For years, critics described hybrids as outdated, but customers kept buying them. Why? Because hybrids solved a problem without asking people to change everything. No charging plan, no range anxiety, no search for a working fast charger, no waiting on a road trip, no apartment parking problem. You filled the tank, you drove, and you used less fuel. That simplicity remained powerful, especially when fully electric cars were still expensive for many buyers, especially when charging infrastructure was inconsistent, especially when customers were uncertain. Toyota had spent decades building trust with ordinary people. And ordinary people do not always adopt technology at the speed investors expect. This was something Toyota understood deeply. The future may arrive quickly in headlines. In the real world, It arrives driveway by driveway, customer by customer, city by city, country by country. But Toyota's caution carried real risk, because while Toyota was defending complexity, China was moving at extraordinary speed. Chinese companies had built enormous expertise in batteries, supply chains, electric drivetrains, software, manufacturing scale. And one company in particular began to look increasingly dangerous. BYD had started with batteries. That mattered. Because in the electric vehicle era, the battery was not just another component, it was the heart of the car. Cost, range, weight, safety, charging speed, supply, all of it came back to the battery. And while traditional automakers had spent a century perfecting engines, transmissions, and fuel systems, companies like BYD were building strength around a completely different center of gravity. Toyota could not ignore this. Tesla had made electric cars desirable. China was learning how to make them at scale. And suddenly, Toyota was not only fighting for the future against Silicon Valley, it was fighting against an entire industrial ecosystem rising in Asia. The irony was enormous. For decades, Toyota had been the challenger from Japan, the disciplined outsider. The foreign company Western automakers underestimated. Now, Toyota risked becoming the established giant, being challenged by a new wave of companies that looked hungrier, faster, and less afraid. History had changed positions. Toyota was now Detroit. At least that was the fear. And Toyota understood the symbolism. It knew what happened to giants that became too slow. It had spent decades defeating them. So Toyota began investing more seriously in battery electric vehicles. It developed new electric platforms, it worked on next-generation batteries. It talked about solid-state technology. It expanded its EV ambitions. But even then, Toyota refused to abandon its broader strategy. It would not simply become Tesla, because becoming Tesla would mean rejecting the logic that had built Toyota in the first place. Toyota did not trust one answer. It trusted systems. It trusted testing. It trusted gradual improvement. It trusted the evidence of real customers. And it trusted the idea that a company selling millions of cars across wildly different regions had a responsibility to serve the world that existed, not only the world people hoped would exist soon. This philosophical difference was visible in the way the two companies approached risk. Tesla often treated risk as the price of speed. Toyota treated risk as something to be controlled. Tesla launched quickly and improved through software. Toyota tested relentlessly before putting millions of vehicles into customer hands. Tesla could redesign assumptions. Toyota refined systems. Neither philosophy was automatically right in every situation. Speed can win. But speed can also create mistakes. Caution can protect quality, but caution can also become paralysis. This was the real tension. Was Toyota being wise, or was Toyota afraid? The answer was not simple, and that was exactly Toyota's point. Some critics looked at Tesla's growth and saw proof that Toyota had failed to move quickly enough. Some looked at Toyota's global sales and hybrid demand and saw proof that Toyota understood customers better than the hype cycle did. Both sides had evidence. Tesla transformed the electric car. Toyota continued selling vehicles on a scale few companies could match. Tesla pushed the industry forward. Toyota continued serving buyers who were not ready, willing, or able to go fully electric. The debate was not really about which company built better cars. It was about two different beliefs about how the future happens. Tesla believed the future must be forced. Toyota believed the future must be absorbed. Tesla wanted the world to change around the product. Toyota wanted the product to work inside the world. And then reality complicated everything. Interest rates rose. Electric vehicle prices became a bigger concern. Some markets saw slower EV growth than the most aggressive forecasts had predicted. Automakers adjusted plans, dealers faced uneven demand. Charging remained a frustration for some drivers. Hybrids regained attention. Suddenly, Toyota's caution did not look quite as foolish. The company that had been accused of falling behind had spent years strengthening the very technology customers were returning to, but Toyota could not celebrate because the long-term threat remained. Battery prices could fall. Charging could improve. Chinese automakers could expand. Software-defined vehicles could change what customers expect from cars. Autonomous driving could transform mobility. Tesla could improve. BYD could grow. Another company nobody was watching could become the next disruption. Toyota had survived many revolutions, but survival is never guaranteed. That is the uncomfortable truth at the center of every empire. Past strength cannot protect you forever. The same habits that once made you successful can become chains. The same caution that prevented mistakes can slow adaptation. The same scale that creates power can make movement harder. Toyota knew this better than most, because Toyota had once been the company attacking the giants. Now it was one of the giants, and giants have more to lose. Yet there was something almost perfectly Toyota about its response. It did not panic. It did not abandon hybrids because the market had decided they were unfashionable. It did not promise that one technology would solve every problem. It kept developing multiple paths. It kept watching, testing, adjusting, learning. To some people, this looked frustratingly slow, but Toyota had never built its empire by winning arguments quickly. It built its empire by surviving long enough for the results to speak. That was the gamble. Tesla was betting that the future would arrive fast. Toyota was betting that the transition would be uneven. Tesla was betting on one dominant technology. Toyota was betting on flexibility. Tesla wanted to define the future. Toyota wanted to survive every version of it. And perhaps that is why Toyota refused to become Tesla. Because Toyota was never trying to be the most exciting company in the room. It was trying to be the company still standing when the room changed, again and again and again. But now Toyota faced the most dangerous challenge of its history. Not because it was weak, but because it was powerful. Not because customers had abandoned it, but because the world was changing faster than ever. The final question was no longer whether Toyota could build reliable cars. It had already proved that. The final question was whether Toyota's greatest strength, patience, could survive an age obsessed with speed, and whether the empire that had outlasted almost everyone could outlast the future itself. Toyota began with thread, not gasoline, not batteries, not software, not artificial intelligence. Thread, a broken thread inside a loom. A small problem that could have been ignored. A machine that could have continued moving, a defect that could have traveled further. But Sakichi Toyoda believed the machine should stop. Stop, expose the problem, understand it, fix it, improve. That simple idea became part of something much larger, a culture, a philosophy, eventually an empire. From a wooden loom in Japan came jidoka. From scarcity came just in time. From repeated problems came kaizen. From limited resources came discipline. From discipline came quality. And from quality came trust. Toyota did not rise because it invented the automobile. It did not. It did not rise because it created the assembly line. It did not. It did not rise because it was the first company to dream about electric cars. It was not. Toyota became powerful because it learned how to take ideas, study them, refine them, remove waste from them, and repeat the process until ordinary improvement became extraordinary strength. That was the real Toyota machine, not the Corolla, not the Camry, not the Land Cruiser, not the Prius, the system behind them. The habit of looking at a problem and refusing to look away, that habit carried Toyota through almost a century of change. It survived war, defeat, post-war devastation, financial crisis, oil shocks, foreign competition, trade tension, Recessions, earthquakes, supply chain disasters, recall scandals, technological disruption, the rise of Tesla, the rise of China, the rise of software. Again and again, the automotive world changed. Again and again, someone announced that the old era was over. Again and again, Toyota remained, not untouched, not perfect, not always right, but still standing. That distinction matters. Because Toyota has made mistakes. Serious mistakes. Its reputation for quality has been challenged. Its executives have faced criticism. Its strategy has been questioned. Its reluctance to fully embrace battery electric vehicles as quickly as some competitors has made it look slow. Its size has sometimes made it cautious. Its caution has sometimes looked like fear. And no company, no matter how powerful, is guaranteed survival. Toyota knows this, perhaps better than most, because Toyota itself was once the outsider, the small Japanese company facing the giants of Detroit, the company nobody expected to dominate the world, the company that American executives could dismiss, the company that did not look dangerous until it was. That history now creates an uncomfortable mirror. Today, new challengers are rising. Tesla changed what an electric car could mean. BYD transformed from a battery company into an automotive giant. Chinese manufacturers are moving at extraordinary speed. Software is becoming as important as horsepower. Artificial intelligence is entering the vehicle. Cars are becoming connected machines. Batteries are becoming strategic assets. Factories are becoming increasingly automated. The center of automotive power is shifting again. And Toyota now faces the exact danger that once destroyed the confidence of its competitors. The belief that size is protection, it is not. The belief that past success proves future relevance, it does not. The belief that customers will always stay loyal, they will not. Every empire eventually faces the same question. Can it change without destroying what made it powerful? For Toyota, that question is enormous. Its greatest strength has always been patience. But what happens when the world rewards speed? Its greatest strength has been reliability. But what happens when customers begin caring as much about software as mechanical durability? Its greatest strength has been manufacturing. But what happens when batteries, chips, data, and algorithms become the new engines of competition? Its greatest strength has been scale. But what happens when smaller companies move faster? There is no simple answer. And that is what makes Toyota's future so interesting. Because Toyota is not facing one enemy. It is facing a change in the nature of the automobile itself. For most of automotive history, the car was primarily a mechanical machine. Steel, rubber, fuel, oil, gears, pistons, combustion. Now the car is becoming something more: a battery, a computer, a network, a software platform, a collection of sensors. Potentially one day, an autonomous machine capable of making decisions without a human driver. The company that mastered industrial discipline must now prove it can master digital speed. And Toyota's answer, once again, is not one single answer. It still believes in multiple paths: hybrids, plug-in hybrids, battery electric vehicles, hydrogen, new battery technologies, new manufacturing methods, software, automation, mobility. To critics, that can look like hesitation. To Toyota, it looks like resilience. Because resilience does not mean predicting one perfect future, it means preparing for several. That may be the deepest lesson in Toyota's entire story. The company was never built around certainty, it was built around problems. Problems in a loom. Problems in a factory. Problems in post-war Japan. Problems in production. Problems in fuel consumption. Problems in quality. Problems in supply chains. Toyota's answer was never to pretend the problem did not exist. Its answer was to stop, look, ask why, then ask why again and again, until the real cause appeared. This is why Toyota's greatest legacy may not be a car at all. It may be a way of thinking. The idea that improvement is never finished. The idea that the worker closest to the problem may understand something the executive does not. The idea that waste is dangerous even when it looks harmless. The idea that hiding a problem is worse than stopping to fix it. The idea that small improvements, repeated for years, can become a competitive weapon. These ideas escaped the automotive industry long ago. Factories studied them, hospitals studied them, technology companies studied them, logistics companies studied them, managers studied them. Entire industries borrowed Toyota language, lean, kaizen, just-in-time, continuous improvement. But Toyota's story also reveals something uncomfortable about business. The world loves dramatic change. It loves the founder on stage, the impossible promise, the breakthrough product. The company that says everything will be different tomorrow. Toyota was almost the opposite of that. Toyota said, tomorrow should be slightly better than today. Then the day after that should be slightly better again. And after enough days, enough years, enough decades, the difference becomes enormous. That is not the kind of philosophy that creates instant mythology, but it can build something more durable. Trust. And trust was Toyota's real empire, not factories, not revenue, not sales numbers. Trust. The trust that the engine would start, the trust that the car would survive, the trust that a family could drive across the country, the trust that a taxi driver could spend all day behind the wheel, the trust that a vehicle could be passed from parent to child, the trust that something ordinary could remain dependable for an extraordinary amount of time. That kind of trust takes decades to build, and only moments to lose. Toyota knows that too, which is why the company's future will not be decided by its past. It will be decided by what it does next. Can it build electric vehicles that customers genuinely want? Can it compete with Chinese speed? Can it master software? Can it maintain reliability as vehicles become more complex? Can it make solid-state batteries practical? Can it prove that hybrids remain relevant without using them as an excuse to move too slowly? Can it remain Toyota without becoming trapped by Toyota? Those are the questions now. And nobody knows the final answer. Maybe Toyota's caution will prove brilliant. Maybe the global transition to electric vehicles will remain uneven for decades. Maybe hybrids will continue to dominate important parts of the market. Maybe Toyota's multi-pathway strategy will allow it to adapt better than companies betting everything on one future. Or maybe the world will move faster than Toyota expects. Maybe battery technology will improve rapidly. Maybe charging infrastructure will become ordinary. Maybe Chinese manufacturers will expand faster than traditional automakers can respond. Maybe software will become the new battlefield where mechanical perfection is no longer enough. Maybe Toyota's patience will finally become too slow. That possibility is real, and it should be. Because a story without risk is not a real story. Toyota is not immortal. No company is. But after nearly a century, one thing is clear. Toyota is exceptionally difficult to kill. Not because it never falls, because it learns. Not because it always predicts the future, because it prepares for uncertainty. Not because it moves first, because when it moves, it tries to build something that lasts. From looms to cars, from Japan to America, from gasoline to hybrids, from manufacturing to software, from the 20th century into the unknown world ahead. Toyota has survived by doing something that sounds simple, looking for the problem and refusing to stop improving. Maybe that is why Toyota never needed to be the loudest company in the world. It never needed a cult of personality. It never needed to promise that tomorrow would look nothing like today. Its promise was quieter. The machine will work. The process can improve, the problem can be solved, the company can adapt. And when the world changes again, we will still be here. That is the Toyota story. Not the story of a perfect company. Not the story of the fastest company. Not even the story of the most innovative company in every era. It is the story of endurance, of discipline, of patience, of small improvements repeated until they became global power, an empire born from a loom, an empire built through trust, an empire challenged by the future, and for now, an empire that still stands. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to Driven Empires for more documentaries about the companies, founders, machines, and technologies that shaped the modern world. Because behind every empire there is a gamble, a moment when success was not guaranteed, a decision that could have changed everything, and a story worth understanding. Thank you for watching. And I'll see you in the next one.